What's up, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of the Sit Down. As always, if you enjoy this video, please make sure you hit the like button and let me know what you think of today's very interesting interview in the comment section below. If you're new here, you just haven't done it yet, or you're living under a rock and you're seeing this video for the first time, I don't know what you're waiting for. Hit that subscribe button below now so you never miss another sit down video. I hope you're all having a great day. As always, I'm your host, Jeff Nate, and we're here for yet another episode of the Sit Down. And this is a monumental day here because I've never done an interview live, but we're going to do it today. And we're going to bring back a guy who we've had on the show before, but it was already almost 2 years ago. It's probably one of my favorite guests I've ever had on here. And I'm really excited to delve a little bit deeper into his career in the FBI and eventually infiltrating the infamous Gambino crime family. It's our old friend looking a lot skinnier this time, Jack Garcia. Jack, how are you? You look great. How many pounds have you
I
lost?
got about 100 pounds I lost, and I got a few more to go. So I'm training, physical training 3 times a week. So, I'm ready to go back in the ring and fight.
That's great, man. As someone who lost weight myself, I'm glad to see you're doing well. You look like you probably look like you did when you were in college at Richmond,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, but I did it the hard way, Jeff. I mean, to me, I was sick. I was in the hospital for 2 months. I had
I
issues with my
see.
kidney. And however, I'm back. But what an ordeal that was for 2 months. And so I'm getting back slowly into it. But weight gain I had to go to this extreme, I guess, to lose it. It's a very tough thing to do. And, finally I'm making progress. I'm walking daily. You know how it is trying to eat the right foods.
Mhm.
And here I am almost at 72, and I'm finding my new life again. So we'll see what happens.
Man, I'm happy to hear that, man. That's great. You took charge of your health, and that's the best thing you can do for your body, man. Plus, it's nice to get out there and move around a little bit each day. I know anyone that you want to get started doing that, just go out and move around. Take a walk, do something like that. But glad to hear it, Jack. It's been a while
Thank
since
you.
we spoke to you.
Likewise.
I've always told you, you were one of my favorite guests we've had. I see you've kind of been moving around doing some things. Um, but I want to ask you, and we're going to get to some questions because right now the mob genre on YouTube is quite large, as you've noticed. There's a lot of people around, a lot of people have questions. We're not going to go into your life story because we did that the first time we had you here. I want to kind of start right at the spot where the FBI, I guess, essentially comes to you and says, "Hey, Gambino family." But I want to ask you, what was the tenor right at that point in the early to mid 2000s about the Gambino crime family? We all know they were very integral and they wanted John Gotti off the street and then they got John Jr. What was the thought in the bureau of the Gambino family at that point? Were they kind of moving on to different business? How did that all start?
Well, it's interesting, Jeff. First of all, I never worked organized crime until this case. So pretty much my expertise was working undercover, working narcotics. But we shared the same office space as the Gambino squad and the Lucchese crime family. And pretty much they were just working cases. Gotti, like you said, was a major victory for the Bureau. And as far as him being in jail was really one of the big victories that they had. And then they moved on to overall trying to working them. I knew the supervisor, Phil Scala, great guy, great supervisor. His squad was very aggressive in trying to make cases. But I guess the celebrity of John Gotti Sr. kind of went away. And there was a whole different, group that came in with different rules, different regulations. They weren't as flashy, especially Arnold Gutierrez. I mean, very low key, a good friend of John, but one that didn't play the way John played. He didn't wear his $1,000 suits, and he didn't be seen in the spotlight. He was kind of living in the shadows as all mobsters are supposed to be living. So it was a very slow moving. It wasn't as easy. Like, for instance, John identified for the Gambino Crime Squad every Wednesday when all the captains were summoned to go to the Raven Night and kiss the ring and bring their, I guess, their envelopes, the tribute envelopes. So now it was a little harder. It became to what the mob is really all about, which is a secret criminal society, not one that's out there making headlines instead of money. So it became a little more tough, more of a chess game as opposed to a checker game, I guess, for a lack of better words. But we had our own thing going in the drug squad. We were overwhelmed with working cases, so but we saw them and they saw us. We respected one another, and finally somebody came to me, one of the agents that worked on another squad in New York, not the Gambino squad, that worked in New Rochelle, that handled the area of New Rochelle, Westchester, and the Bronx, and said, listen, there's a possible undercover case that we got going. There's a strip club up in the Bronx that's being shaken down by Albanians, and we want you to go in, take a look-see, and see if we can identify more of these Albanians, who they are. So we did the research. We found out that it was Alex Rudaj and company. They were going into the clubs. They were demanding protection money, and the protection was, of course, from them, and the owner of the club, but the owners, rather, with a plural, the club said, we're not going to pay for that. We have our own security team here, and they wound up coming back, tearing the place up, and decided that this is going to happen on a daily basis unless, of course, you paid. So that's when I was introduced. And we were trying to figure out what the Albanians were. And sure enough, after one of their coming in and destroying the place, and I wasn't there for that, the next day we were visited by Louis Filipelli, known as Bo, and he came in and he told the owners that he heard he had a problem and he could make that problem go away. And that was, you pay us and we'll make sure these Albanians do not return. So that's where we came in, and I wound up paying Filipelli and his guys to keep the guys from coming in here, the Albanians. He assured you that that wasn't going to happen, and sure enough, the Albanians stopped coming. So it was kind of like a joint team effort where one creates a situation and then the other one offers a solution. But it's still the same extortion plot,
Right. Well, I find this interesting because Bo Filipelli currently is considered a higher ranking individual in that family today. But back then he was, kind of making his way through the ranks. So I guess I'll ask, so you first, as far as I know, make contact in that family with Louis Filipelli, right?
Yes.
How does that happen? So I almost equate it to like when you go to school for the first time, you're excited, you just kind of walk in, you see your friend. How do you just go into the strip club and just start talking to them? Like, how does that work?
No. What happens when you do an undercover, there are many different scenarios to introduce an undercover agent. And I've done them all. One is where you go into a place, you out of town, and you just over time develop an interest in you, who you are, where you getting your money from, how are you dressing, are you a knockaround guy, that kind of thing. And that even applies to the drug world. Then the other one, easiest way, is to have informants that are credible, that are individuals who are respected in the mob, who are maybe close associates, to make that introduction. And that's the way we opted. So an introduction was made where I wound up paying Zuccarado and Filipelli, Zuccarado being at that time an associate. I don't even know what he is today. But Filipelli was a guy that I personally didn't like. I mean, he thought he was a tough guy. He thought he was, every other word was Bo. He was quite insulting to some people, but typical, guy who was a tough guy. Meanwhile, he went to Cardinal Spellman High School. So, let's put that on the line first.
Do you remember the first thing he ever said to you?
No, just the usual, hey, how you doing? You should play in the NFL. It was one of those things.
Wow.
So and as I got to see him and meet him throughout, it was more like, hey, come kiss my ring, something I never did because I was always with Greg. So, but the first introduction was pretty much like, hey, guys, look, this is the money. We don't want these guys coming in here. And keep in mind, though, Jeff, that the club, the strip club that we were on, the Mirage at that time, it was called, it was before that Pretty Woman that was under the umbrella of Gotti Jr. and Craig DePalma's son's umbrella. That was a big cash cow for them. The club changed hands. They were changed the whole thing. So the mob knew that this place that operated in the gray area was a good target, that they could shake this place down because they'd shook it down before. So that's kind of why maybe they devised to work with the Albanians, who at the time were being used by the Gambinos to go in and, shake things up. And they, of course, would come in and say, we can make all this go away, but now you got to pay us. It's the same thing as paying, you either pay the Italians or you pay the Albanians.
Right.
So,
Sure.
it was one of those things. And then later on in time, the Albanians they got wise and said, well, why are we working for these guys? We're the tough guys. We're the ones taking the risk. So, and started going out on their own non-sanctioned shakedowns, which they did all through the
Was there
Astoria, Queens.
was there a concern at that point in the bureau? Because I've heard certain conversations of other families discussing that, why don't we just kill all these guys, these Albanians? Like I've heard the Lucchese family had considered at one point just taking them all out. Was there a general concern that may happen? Because Albanians were crazy. That Ruda organization were nuts.
Well,
As
I
you know.
do know that Greg DePalma was very, keep in mind that he came out of jail. And that same day that he came out of jail, he went to the strip club. He was already
Yeah.
looking for money,
Right.
that he wanted to establish himself. So much for redemption here. I mean, the guy just went right back to what he does best, which is criminal work. So what happened was he found out that the Albanians not only were moving in, but that they had shaken down some club and threw one of the Gambino brothers out in the street naked.
Yeah.
And they smacked him around. And he thought that that was a tremendous insult to their family. And why was nothing done about that? So he went on this tirade, which of course I was recording. And interesting enough, keeping in mind that Greg DePalma, yes, he liked to talk. By the way, that was an excellent video you did, Jeff, on the
Thank you.
history of Greg DePalma. But
Thank
he
you.
liked to talk, but we liked to listen. So
Yeah.
it really was a nice match. So he went off on this tirade, how insulting that was, how disrespectful it was, and how nothing was done, and how now they're making garbage cans, and these guys have no business getting straightened out. There's some guys who are civilians who shouldn't be straightened out. He was really bothered by that. But also he was bothered by what happened in Greenwich, Connecticut, originally with Nicola Sorsa, when they were shaking down, the Albanians were moving in onto that restaurant called Valvella's in Greenwich. And what had happened there was the Albanians hung the owner by his feet and used him as a punching bag. So, and this has happened while Greg was in jail. So he was aggravated with them. And also, don't forget the Rayos table. That was John Gotti's table that became the
Right.
Albanians table. So Greg went out to a place, I believe in the Bronx, Cafe something, I guess where these guys, Alex and the so-called corporation used to hang out. And I said to him, hey, Greg, you want me to go with you, And he said, no, Jack, boy, I got this. He went with another guy into the Lion's Den. And I was kind of impressed at Greg because his old guy didn't care. We all fully knowing what the Albanians were capable of. And he wanted to keep them checked as to what it was expected of them to happen. Then, of course, the Albanians broke that. And later on, there was a sit-down or that gas station incident, as
So
you
you're
mentioned.
saying that Greg DePalma at in his 70s, essentially walked into Rayo's and said, "What the fuck are you doing?" Basically,
Yeah,
like, why are you acting like
he
this?
wanted to know
Wow.
why they were there, and also he went to their place, which is Cafe. The name skips me. It's in the Bronx, but he went right to them and said, "I don't want you in this. You, first of all, you don't have John Gotti's table. That's our table." So,
What did they say?
well, they gave in to the table part. The Valvella situation was a little more delicate. That went down to later on. But he was pleased, I guess, to get that John Gotti table. And let me tell you, he used that. There were many fundraising events by legitimate citizens that somehow Greg got involved at the golf course. We actually had golf courses where people paid like $500 for a ticket, and it went for great cause like children cancer and all of that. And Greg, of course, would make money by selling the tickets for the table, and then he started making. I'll bring in the counterfeit sports memorabilia. I'll bring anything out of stolen arts. I mean, it was out of this world. The money that he was able to generate. But Greg DePalma, old as he was fearless. I give him that. He was a fearless guy, and the Albanians kind of, I guess, respected him because they would have probably given him a beating like they gave the Gambino brothers, but they didn't.
There was obviously, when you talk about De Palma, he was constantly discussed, right? He was constantly talking. There was even at one point someone said in the family, like, he needs to stay the fuck away, him and his loudmouth son. Was the Bureau kind of in the same thought that this guy's a target? This is the guy that we like to listen. Was that the general thought? Hey, this guy likes to talk. Get him talking. Was that the? Was
Yes,
that the
absolutely.
goal?
I mean, he was the perfect target. It wasn't a target of an opportunity. It was a guy that, when he came into us, how that, happened was the Albanians and Louis Filipelli was part of Louis Filipelli gets rid of the Albanians. They are now under the wings of Louis Filipelli. Well, Greg DePalma comes back. He says he's told that some guy comes in from the Gambinos who is now under the umbrella. He said, bullshit, that's not the way it works. This is my club. So Greg went right up to the top, to the boss, and told him what had happened, that this was on record with him. And Filipelli came back and said, simply goes, look, you could stay with Greg or you could come with us.
Okay.
But Greg got his stripes back, meaning that Greg somehow was able to, convince the administration and the powers to be that he was still a moneymaker and that club was under his name. And Louis Filipelli had to kind of tuck his tail between his leg and leave.
So it's kind of like in similar to Donnie Brasco in real life. Anthony Mira made a beef that it was Donnie was under him, and then Lefty said no, he's under me, and they had to sit down, and it was given that Lefty was his superior. So you decide at that point, obviously Greg's a little bit higher in the totem pole. He's a bigger fish, if you will. Do you remember the first conversation you ever had with Greg? Like, what did he say to you? Do you remember?
He was a character, this guy. What happened was we would go to a place called Spaghetti Western, which was up out of all places, you know what I mean? It was
why that place with all the great
because Greg
areas?
knew somebody in the place, and we went there. Nice place, great food, and Greg would hold court. And guys would come in, and what happened was myself and the owners went to see him, and as it's done in the mob, is when you come out of jail, they give you an envelope. Now that envelope is to kind of get your feet back on the ground, which is a pretty interesting thing where, when people, it just doesn't happen everywhere, but he gets a very generous envelope. We would sit around. I went there. I was invited. I was introduced, but I kept my distance. I wasn't a fanboy. I wasn't a guy who would be like overwhelmed. Like I noticed some people would come up to Greg shake his hands. He said, boy, I remember the Westchester Premiere Theater days, Greg. What a great show. Sammy Davis was great. Dionne Warwick, Frank Sinatra. I've been to all of them, and they would be like considering Greg to be a true celebrity gangster because he hobnobbed with the rich and famous. So I would sit there, I wouldn't say a word. I was taking all in, laugh when I had to. Of course, some of his buddies or people that he was with at that time would come in and talk to me like, I want to find out who I am because that's, I'm a big guy, so I draw attention. Like, who's this big Mama Luke, So one of the guy gets me aside and one of the things that was amazing, Greg would be sitting there smoking. Now keep in mind, he's got like a half a lung if he's lucky through all these surgeries that he's had with his lung. He would be smoking like a chimney. But the way he would smoke is first of all, he'd grub his smoke. He never had any. So he'd grub his smoke, he'd take the filter out and he'd smoke it by himself. And just like, it was like Lucky Strike or Pall Mall. Remember those old-fashioned cigarettes?
Sure.
Camel.
Wow.
And he would do that. So what happened was I figured I had an entree because I was working a case down in Atlantic City, the counterfeit case dealing with counterfeit cigarettes. So it came to my mind right away to this guy. As I'm talking to him, I said to him, hey, is Greg all right? I mean, because he goes on a coughing fit. Meanwhile, he's still smoking these cigarettes. And he says, yeah. He goes, so what does he smoke? He says, you'll smoke whatever. He said, why? He said, you got some? And I go, I could come up with some. He says, really? He says, well, I'll see what happens. Let me make some calls. Let it go. I figured, let me not push it. They're going to come to me. So sure enough, the third or fourth dinner thing, as I got more comfortable going to these dinners that Greg was having, the guy goes, hey, whatever happened to those cigarettes? You got to, oh, you want a sample? I'll get you a sample. I got it in the car. Because I had just come from Atlantic City. I had some. So I take a couple of packs, give it to him. I think they were Marlboros, and these were counterfeit, okay? But they were perfectly packaged. They were in great condition. But of course, the price was much cheaper. I give it to this guy, and he tells me how much he can get for. The price escapes me, but they were really very cheap that he could make money. He said, well, I got a guy in Connecticut, says, his name was Joe Murray. That was his sidekick, Joe Murray. Joe Murray goes, I got a guy up there, we'll see what happens. So I leave him 4 or 5 cartons, Sure enough, he calls me back. He says, cigarettes are great, we want some. So he wound up buying like maybe 10 cases. Not cartons, cases. Boxes. I think contain 50 cartons in each one.
So 500 units, basically.
Right. So he then goes and I give it to them at the club. They come get it and pack it up and take off. 3 days later, he goes, the guy didn't like the cigarettes. He said, people over there, they didn't like the taste. I said, fine, just give it back to me. Gives me back all the cigarettes, and this is now going on like the 10th meet that I'm having. So I said to him, I can get rid of them. I said, I was doing you a favor, but it don't matter to me. I got them sold already. So I come back, I gave him an envelope, I think it was $3,000, and it wrapped, and I gave it to Murray. Murray gave it to him under the table, and his eyes lit up. And then he started talking. He goes, hey, Jackie boy, where you from? I'm from Florida. Oh, that's nice. Yeah, I wish to retire. I got friends down there. And then the attraction came. The attraction came solely because I wet his beak. And solely because that's what in that life, as you know, Jeff, it's all about money. That's all it's about. And the greed kicks in automatically. And that greed, you could just see it in Greg. He says, this guy could get cigarettes. This guy does the right thing, which is what the mob is all about. You got to keep your mouth shut. You got to play by the rules, and you got to kick up. You also got to be ready to, to do possible violence, capable of violence, and also the possibility that you may have to do jail time. So he started liking me, and it more was like weeks turned into about a month or two. Then one day, I'm sitting at the restaurant again for lunch at Spaghetti Western. Joe Murray comes, come on, we're going to go for a ride. Now, those are the words you don't want to hear. You want to go for a
You don't want
ride.
to hear
It's
that.
like,
Right?
oh, shit, here it comes.
They're gonna kill me.
Right.
Right.
So, luckily, now they pull up with one of those, what was the name of the XT? They were a funny type of, it was a
Hummer.
small car. A what?
A Hummer?
No, not a Hummer.
Or
It
no?
was a small car that Greg wanted, and he had like side things on him. Anyway, he goes, "Come on in." Now, luckily, my size, I couldn't get in the front, right? Because Joe Murray was driving. So I'm sitting in the back now. I'm saying, "Boy, these guys are nice. They're gonna whack me. It's just a hit."
They're not
I'm
gonna
in the
do it.
back seat. I got them. So I said, okay, I could breathe a little easier, right? We go to this jewelry store, and at the jewelry store, he's checking some things out. He goes, "Give me a jacket, I want to talk to you." And I go outside with him, and he goes, you're a good man," he said to me. And he goes, "I put you on record with our family. No one could fuck with you, nobody." I said, "You got any problems, you tell people you're with me." He says, and he goes, "Here's a token of my appreciation to you for getting me those cigarettes. Although it didn't work out, here it is." He gave me this gaudy ring that was diamond covered. And meanwhile, that was the worst part because I had to wear this ugly ring, But to him, it meant a lot, like I gave him a ring. So, of course, he says afterwards, what else can you do for me? I know you're in Florida. I said, "Well, I see we can, get maybe some jewelry for you." Great. And that's when I started bringing him. I went from getting him cigarettes, tribute, now I started getting him jewelry. Now, we had access to the best jewelry store in the world, the FBI's forfeiture unit, where every bad guy that we take their watches, their things, and sure enough, I would bring in watches to him. He would sell them. So I sell him, let's say, a Rolex President for $5,000. He turn around and sell that for 10, or he'll sell it for 8,000. So he's automatically making money. But then he would, of course, try to work with me with other deals and all, and that's how we forged our relationship. Was all about making money with him, and he saw me as a money maker, able to go everywhere. Now, when I was working my other cases, which I was working simultaneously, they kind of worked out for me, because when I went to Atlantic City to go work that Asian organized crime case that I did, I would say, "Look, I'm going down to Atlantic City. I'm going to see some guy." "Oh, that's great, Jackie. You're going to get some," he called them trophies. "You're going to get some trophies?" I said, "I'm going to try my best." So I would go there. He would call me. And then, of course, I would show up the next day. I drove back, or a couple of days afterwards. And every once in a while, we greased his palm. We gave him a little something, a little taste, as we say.
So you could kind of run things simultaneously. You're killing a couple of birds at one stone. It worked
Yes.
perfectly. Let me ask you, this is something fascinating about DePalma that I find. So I want everyone to take a look at this picture. And I'm Jack, I'm showing them the picture of Greg with Castellano and Carlo and Frank Sinatra. And there's a reason that I'm showing this. Greg DePalma was made in the 70s. He goes back to really like the early 60s. This guy is in the Gambino family, he's a long-time member. Were you surprised by the fact that he was so willing to just deal with you? Like, I don't know.
You know what it was? It's really kind of weird, because other people came around us, and he was very cautious. He avoided them. He'd go, "I don't want to meet anybody.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk to him." Keep in mind, the factors were, we used people that were with him for a long time. So that vouch helped tremendously. Plus, I've done this before many times. Not this working organized crime, but working with cartels, working with, I know how to behave, and I know how to act, and I know how to dangle that carrot in a way that makes me an interesting individual. So to answer that, is a combination of those. I wasn't like a rookie agent. Keep in mind, I had like 20 years on the job. So
Yeah.
I knew that this chess game that we were playing, I was one up on him every time, because I knew what he was about to do when he do it. Now, that wasn't because people say, "Oh, he was an easy target," or Jack did 2.5 years, he was proposed, and all of that. Yeah, I was 2.5 years and I was proposed, but a lot had to do with my experience that I have, the training that I went under to get this. I mean, I had some amazing guys, agents in the office, guys like Chris Munger, guys like Nat Parisi who worked the case, guys who taught me the way of living because I knew how to deal with Colombians and Mexican, South American drug traffickers. But now I'm dealing with different. I had to learn how to do that. It's an organization that you have to show respect and deference to. You know,
Right.
there's accountability. That's the big word with that mob. You accountability where with with other guys that I was working, the dopers, I didn't owe them an explanation. And if they ask me something, I get in their face like, "What are you, a cop?" You just don't do that. Here, you have to do what the mob tells you to do. If you're in that thing, if Greg DePalma called me up, which he called me all the time, said, "Jack," says, "come pick me up, bring an umbrella, it's going to rain today." And I look out the window and I see bright sunshine, not a cloud in the sky. I'm going to bring an umbrella. And why am I going to bring the umbrella?
You were
Because
told to.
Greg DePalma told me.
Right.
And that's the way it works in that family. So the accountability was, I nailed it tight. I had the IDs. I had other informants in Miami in case they were ever contacted that would vouch for me. I even went as far as going to a cemetery and find a Mr. and Mrs. Falcone who had passed. And the event, I was down there, and let's say I'm with Robert Vaccaro, or I'm with Greg, and Greg says to me, "Hey, Jackie, boy, you're from Florida." I says, "I know your parents passed away. Let's go to a cemetery." I mean, just think about that. Like, Jeff,
You
if
had
I
to
said
think
that to
ahead.
you, what do you do?
Right. You had to.
It's a tough. So
That's
I knew I would get flowers. I knew where to go. The only
wow.
thing is, I would hope that the Falcone family wasn't there watching me put the thing on it, because
That's
otherwise they're going to say, "Who
incredible
the hell are you?"
foreshadowing. Wow.
So
That's
you
incredible.
had, but you had to
Yeah.
do that when you're doing with these type of guys. It's like, but I was able to dismiss a lot of that thing because he generally started to like me and depend on me that I became his driver. I
Let me
mean,
ask you, how did you, and I want to ask you about that because I have a question on being a driver for him. The Falcone gravesite, did you just scour graveyards until you found one?
yeah,
Or
no, what we did is I called all the cemeteries that in Miami. The Falcones are buried in the same cemetery as Jackie Gleason. And and like I said, like I see it where it is, and I called up and I said, "I'm sorry, I'm looking for a long lost relative. I thought he had passed and he's buried here. Oh, what's her name? Falcone." And they said, "Oh, we have one Falcone, bingo," and that was it.
wow, that's
And,
an amazing story.
but
That's
but you have to you have to do that in
yeah,
that world because it's it could wind up backfiring you.
yeah, it's great foreshadowing, you're right. You always have to be on your toes. So you become a driver for Greg, which is a big thing. I mean, Greg, again, longtime guy. Um, so what's a typical day like for Greg? Right? Do- tell me
That's a
kind of
great, even that makes me laugh. Typical day with Greg
like
is,
start it like when you pick him up, what's is he generally in a good mood? What do you do all day? What's the general day with Greg DePalma like?
all right, it's unbelievable. First of all, and it was the same thing over and over again. He started the morning early, he had to eat. So we go to a diner. Guys drop in,
The
we're in this
Eastchester
diner.
Diner, I believe it
The
was.
Eastchester Diner was one of them, right. He had
Yeah.
these diners that he loved to go and sometimes hold meetings. Then after that, I would drive him to the hospital to see his son, where Craig DePalma was in a vegetative coma. So we would drop him off there, sit there, entertain, where people would come by. They bring pastries, they bring, things, and everybody's engaging. A lot of payoffs are going by. Some of the guys that he's shaking down, he makes them come down and pay. Then from there, of course, lunchtime. So you go to lunch and you eat like you're going to the chair, food
What
everywhere,
did he
great
like to
restaurant.
eat, Jack?
Oh, everything was, and I forget. It's always like he started off with soup, but he loved chicken, but the chicken had to be with the bone. And Greg's voice, you gotta wrap around his voice. He would talk like this. He goes, Jackie boy, I want to get some goddamn chicken, and I want to have some pizzelles, and hey, some fazools. I'm really starving today. We'll go over that place. And he would have that gangster voice.
Yeah.
He really was. He was like a Robert
Hey,
Loggia.
how you doing? How you
Yeah, how
doing?
you doing? And then when we sit there, people come around again, tell him how they remember the days. He was, what business you're in? He'd give him a card, and he would have a stack of cards like this, usually, and that's like from a week's work. He says, Jackie boy, I got hundreds of these things. So he in his mind is, if he needed somebody with a rug, and he shook a guy down for a rug. I saw him. The guy goes, you're in the rug business. My wife's driving me crazy. I need rug. Person goes, I'll give you drugs. I ain't got any money. He would say that as his pockets were stuffed with gold. He would go, I got no money. So the guy then installs this, right? Rugs in his house, really nice. And he goes, you got to take those rugs out to the guy. He goes, why? He goes, they're not the good rugs, that Burberry. I want the real good ones. And this guy was like, he just loved to shake people down for the most insignificant things. And like I told you one, Jeff, I couldn't believe it. We went to Leroy Neiman's place. He's robbing him blind. Lehman is a friend of his who was willing to testify in his trial. It's a character reference. And he would bring it too because, Jackie boy, see this tube? I bring it in here, it's empty. But I send him over there to the other room, and I'm in his studio. And there I just go through these drawers and fold and throw it in the juice. So he walk out with 5 or 6 of them. And then he get a discount, tremendous discount, on the paintings, and he had customers. So he'll buy the painting maybe for $3,000 and he sell it for 20. I mean, who would think of that? Robbing a
He was a
friend.
grade A, just scam artist, schemer. Like he's just stealing everything. How
That's what
much
he
money
does.
do you
That's
think
it.
he's stolen?
Yeah.
This
And then we would
hundreds of
go get
million?
the frame, some of this stuff.
Yeah.
And as we're walking out, these little stuffed dolls, and Greg is going like this. And I go, what are you doing? So he goes, what do you mean? He goes, you want a little for your daughter? He says, no, just come on, let's go. So I go, Greg, I mean, really, you're going to get busted or something like that. He goes, I can't help myself. This is what we do. What do you think we do? So robbing was his game. The same thing when we went to the big man shop in Manhattan. They had this big store. We go in, all of a sudden I'm shopping for a shirt or something. I see him taking ties and rolling them in his coat and socks. It was like, are you kidding me? And he would complain at not having one penny, but yet he had money because I know I gave him some money. So I knew he had that. And he says, no, I'm broke. He had his teeth done free. This guy was like, he would take anyone to the cleaners. He was a master at it. He was a master of getting money from people and then all of a sudden or services and just not pay them. Amazing. He had that. He would know how to exploit people. He knew just by looking at them, he knew, is this guy a mark or not? And if he picked in his mind that you were a mark, you got to go. He'll pursue it relentlessly.
Right. He was a complete just leech, really.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
in every sense of the word.
and the whole day so consisted of getting money. Let's go here. We got this guy better show up. He owes me some money, and then he would get into spouts with his wife. Oh my God! It
What was that?
brutal.
What were they fighting about?
About everything. It just she would say, "You put Craig in the life. Why did you do that? It's your fault." And then he'd call her every expletive known to man. This is why. And the nursing home was the sickest of all. I was there when he's looking for the nursing home, and he's going around telling the director of nursing home, listen, the director says, Mr. DePalma, first of all, this is a Jewish center. So he goes, well, my wife is Jewish. He said, yeah, he goes, but you have a reputation, sir. You're in that, we don't want that life here. This is a very quiet, tranquil place, and we want to keep it that way. He goes, I give you my word that there's not going to be any hanky-panky, nothing going on. Yeah, everything will be smooth. Well, that was the biggest lie because we had mob meetings. There were mobsters in and out of there all day long. There was him going crazy, telling these people that are ill to shut up when they disturbed him. And it kind of broke my heart because these are people who let their older folks go to these places in order to spend their last years or whatever the case may be. They're sick. And he was just all about himself. Craig's room was covered in posters. He had music. He would play. He would talk to his son. He would caress his son. And he really loved his son. But he believed that his son was going to come out of this coma. And before I even knew Craig was coming, I thought he was one of those typical, mafia flu things where, when they go to trial, they're all unshaven,
Yep.
drooling, and how sick they are. But no, I mean, Craig was legitimately, and what I hear from other guys when I was out there in the streets, that he had no business being in the mob, Craig. And John Gotti Sr. proposed Craig and put him in John Gotti Jr.'s crew. And they were like inseparable. But they didn't, Craig was, Greg was very touching about that. And he would say, Jackie boy, come on in. He says, hey, Craig, look, he's going to be one of us one of these days soon. He would have conversations with him. He had a witch doctor come in there. He would say to you, oh, he's conversing. Look at him, Jackie. I asked him a question. How you doing? How's everything? Blink if you're okay. And automatic response, you blink, And when you automatically blinked, he thought that he was talking to him. And it broke my heart. It really was like, it showed part of humanity for Greg, a part that I had never seen,
Right. You had always just seen him stealing and being a miserable
right,
guy
and
to
talking
people.
about crimes and beating this guy up and
Right.
this and that. But this was, they were very close together. But him and his wife were cat and dog and yell at and each other. Made it very uncomfortable when they went off because I would get up and leave and he goes, "You said Jackie boy," and he would just call her every name and that's it. And
I want you to, I want you to, because you do a good job of humanizing these people because you were around them. The things the really wretched things they did, and this genre has become kind of an ode to like these are great guys. These are regal guys, and it's like no, they do some scummy stuff. Like think about your own family in a nursing home. You got to see people doing deals. But I want to ask you about kind of a memorable thing that you've talked about. If anybody's ever seen The Sopranos, they remember the scene when Feach LaManna comes out of prison and Tony gets sick of him, and they set him up with the TV thing. That happened in real life in this whole situation. Can you tell the people about that?
yeah, that was wild. What happened was we tried something new instead of jewelry. Is Greg said, "Hey, listen, how do we get one of these plasma TV?" At that time, plasma was the
Yeah.
big thing, and they were very expensive. 5-6 grand, or even more. So Greg figures he'll make money that way. So we figured we'd tease him a little. I says, "Hey, a couple of my guys up in the Heights got a hold of some TVs." Oh, and right away his eyes lit up. How many? He goes, "Well, I got to think about two." Well, what is he selling? About $2 a piece. You could sell them whatever. So he's happy about that. Then he comes up to me and he says, Jackie boy, you know what? I want to give a gift to Arnold. Because his whole thing was keeping Arnold, the bosses, happy. He would shower them with gifts. He would always go the extra mile with the money. He even would tell me that. You got to give this guy 10, give him 20%. Got to 20, you got to give him 30. It was always all about, because if you ever step on your crank, they're there to help you. They're not going to say, this guy,
Right.
it's a garbage can. We just let him go. So what happened with that is we decide to give Arnold a TV as a gift. Of course, we're paying, but so off we go. I get it to Greg, he has Vaccaro take it to Arnold's house. I think either to Louis Filipelli or not. So one night, a couple of weeks later, I'm in bed. This is like maybe 2 or 3 in the morning. The phone rings, and it's Greg. And that was not unusual, you know. And Greg goes, "Hey, Jackie boy, I got a quick question to ask you. That TV you got, where did you get it from?" I says, "You know where I got it. I got it from my guys up in the Heights." He says, "Well, I need to see you right away." I says, "When?" He goes, "Like now." I says, "All right, I'm coming." So get dressed, call the office, go see him. He says, "I want to know, is this TV stolen?" I said, "Greg, of course it's stolen. What do you think? I went to Best Buy and bought it?" That's what I did. But I told him that. So anyway, he goes, "Oh, you're not going to believe this shit I've been through all night long." I said, "What happened?" He goes, "I get a call from Arnold telling me, where did I get this TV? And once I told him, he says, he wants this TV out of there." So we had to go and unmount his television set and get rid of it because he watched this Soprano show, and in it, he saw this guy who was on parole, like Arnold, get set up with these television sets, and he thought it was a setup for him. "The aggravation, you got me, the adjective." I said, "What do you mean I got you? It wasn't my idea. Greg, it was your idea." So he goes, "Oh man, what a freaking night." So anyway, it's like life imitating art, you know? And there was your
Yeah,
perfect
it really is.
example of that happened.
That's just a hilarious story. I've always I've heard you tell that before. It's just so funny.
Yeah, it really is. It was because the same thing happened with Andrew Campos, a similar thing. He wanted a TV, so I met with him and wound up giving him a television set, and he was very happy. Had some of his guys pick it up, and but what happened was we never charged Campos because Campos was being worked on by the other squad. I mean, the great squad C16, where they did that whole telemarketing fraud case,
Yep.
which Jeff was amazing. I mean, that according to Greg, they made $1 billion.
Yep.
There
They did.
wasn't.
Yeah.
They pled out to some hundreds of millions of dollars, but he said it was a tremendous scam. And of course, Greg somehow brings it back to him that it was his son who got it started. It was kind of his idea. It wasn't. He was just looking to get his hands in the pocket with that.
Sure.
But there was a lot of money that was generated on that case.
We are live. I'm going to get to some questions here in just a little bit, but someone's asking, why was Craig DePalma in a coma?
Yeah, Craig DePalma went to prison. I believe was the Gold Club case down in Atlanta and the Scores case.
Yeah.
And what had happened was he went there with John Gotti Jr. as well as Mikey DiLeonardo and there was a slew of other guys. And he's down in prison, and I guess he's approached by the government, and he decides to cooperate and testifies in the grand jury. And then he finds religion. Now, the way Greg told it to me was that the feds went in and they're the ones who hung him. But what really happened was Greg did arrange a meeting prior to him hanging himself where he, in prison, because he had the connections with the guards who some of them took money and gifts and other things from the mobsters. Greg said he arranged it to meet with his son, and he told his son, "Hey, listen," he goes, "you can't betray the family." I said, "What are you doing? You can't." And that made, he says, "You're not one of us." And he berated his son for cooperating. And that was one of the causes of why he hung himself, unfortunately. That's what what I've heard through the grapevines, to some people in the bureau, as well as in the prison system. Now, the thing about that happened with Greg was that he spread the word that it was the feds who got him in the cell, and it was the FBI who hung him, which is total lie.
So he was in denial, basically.
He was totally in denial of it, and he claimed that nothing. He never cooperated. But one of the mob guys did have, I think it was Nicky Carrazzo, did have a copy of his cooperation, which of course, angered Greg even more because he was such in denial that he claimed that his son never violated the oath of omerta.
Ultimately, you became so close to Gregory DePalma. You met Arnold. You knew all these guys. And this was essentially the hierarchy of the Gambino crime family in the mid 2000s. You were proposed for membership. How did that conversation go? Did Greg just come to you one day and say, "Listen, Jackie boy, we're gonna induct you here"? How did that work?
Well, it was kind of interesting. He's told me numerous times, and we have that on recordings, how he approached it. He said to me, "Jackie boy," one day he goes, "I know you were involved in business before that we're not supposed to be involved in," and he's meaning drugs. So he goes, "When was the last time you got any problems for the last 5 years?" And I go, "Like any cases or anything that could bite you?" I says, "No." He goes, "Because that's a no-no." Even though that was a no-no, it was a no-no with Greg. Greg didn't deal with drugs. But now, would Greg accept money from drugs? Absolutely. But he would know. It would be like plausible deniability. So he said to me, "Well, good." He goes, "I'm putting your name on the list." So I said, "Well, look, I'd be honored. Thank you for that." He goes, "Yeah, Jackie boy." I said, "I want to put your name on the list and you're going to be one of Amico Nostrum. So I said, "Well, great." So I asked later on about this list, and the list, of course, is a list of names of those who have died and those who are replaced. And that supposedly was circulated, and through our other informants, they've seen the list, and my name was on there, because the first thing people say, "Who the fuck is this guy Falcone?" So it was more like curiosity. But all of that went south when one time I'm with Vaccaro and Greg, and they said to me, he goes, "Jackie boy, everything's on hold now." And I go, "What are you talking about?" He says, "What happened?" He says, "We got information that somebody big is ratting. So we're putting everything on ice right now." And sure enough, soon after that, we found out Joe Messino was cooperating.
What did when you found that out, what did Greg say? Because I've always been fascinated as to what these old school guys thought of that decision. What did he say to you?
Well, it was just simply like, I put your name on the list, and he told me a story about how his son.
Well, I mean Joe Messino. Like when you found out Joe
Oh,
Messino was
right. With Joe Messino, he mentioned, first of all, they couldn't believe it, because he was first a close confidant of John. The guy has a amount of tremendous history within the mob. So Greg goes, "I can't believe this guy is throwing everything into turmoil." He says that family is even involved in making their guys naked
yeah,
before. And he would
I've heard that.
say, "How the hell could you make someone and then at the same propose that someone, at the same time strip them not only of their clothes but of their dignity, and have them around all these captains naked with their schlongs hanging out, and do what? And then for what?" He goes, "And then you're going to induct them to be a brother, to be in your family?" And Greg would be so like laughing about that, because keep in mind, he was old school, although he was old school when he got on the phone and called everybody, he got straightened out. But he thought that was like, graduate. Like for me, it was equivalent to, I guess, when I became an FBI agent, or the birth of my daughter. It was that was such a proud moment for him. And when he heard that naked part, he couldn't believe it. And then, of course, so that was what Messina was. It was a betrayal of the oath. And if you couldn't trust him, who are you going to trust? So he's seeing the demise of this organization, of this thing this Cosa Nostra. He's seeing the demise, because, if you start chalking away how many people are cooperating, you start to see and believe the fact that the great job the government is doing, because the mobsters are fearing more of the government than they are of themselves.
right.
They
No,
know they're
and
going to
that's
get hit with RICO for years.
right. Right, and that's kind of where we are today. The government has had so much power against them. You ultimately were told by your superiors that they were going to pull you at that point. Why do you think they did that? Don't you think you being made would have been significantly better for kind of building an even bigger case?
Listen, you're preaching to the choir. I was upset, as were the United States attorneys, as was the Nat Parisi, Chris Mungo, all the guys that worked this case, Joe Della Penna. We had a guy from labor who really made a lot of our case, this labor. This Joe Della Penna did a fantastic job. Honestly, everybody could not believe that this was happening. And it was such a short-sighted decision. My identity was not compromised. I was in no danger whatsoever. It was in, all of a sudden, their response was, well, this is known as an administration case. The boss is coming down, the underboss, and these guys are getting old. They may die. I said, guys, you're not looking at the big picture. When I work dope, all we ever do is climb the ladder. Here, I have a situation where if I get straightened out, we could develop scenarios throughout the country, introduce other undercover agents, and flush out the who's who in the mob world. That's
Right.
what we did in this case. No one ever heard of Louis Filipelli. He was no chart, Bo. No one. He didn't even exist. We identified him. We identified the administration, who Arnold was, and Anthony McGalley and Carrazzo were running the show. We also identified other players, Vaccaro, Basili. I mean, the list goes on, people that didn't exist, or how many captains they had compared to what I was told. I was told 26. And so all of that situation, we had an opportunity of a lifetime. This hasn't happened since Joe Pistone Day, that now we have an opportunity to do all this. And for some reason, some people chose to end it. And a lot of disappointed people on our end for the case. But the Bureau is known as the FBI, the bureaucracy decided that, hey, let's end this and we can have this a great press conference and pat each other in the ass and tell how great we
Yep.
are and move on to other bigger jobs. And you know, I don't understand it. And something I never will, and the case would have gone forever. But I've seen these kinds of things happen in the Bureau, and it all depends on who the managers are. Like, I know if I was working in the Gambino squad with Phil Scala, I'd probably still be out there.
Right.
You know, I'd be identifying people, they'd be picking them off, they'd be working.
You might be the boss of the family by now.
Yeah, you're
Could
right.
you imagine that?
I'd be taking
Unbelievable.
chicken. Yeah, that would be a classic, you know. But I don't understand it. It really is a mystery to me.
So ultimately, about 40 people in the Gambino crime family and other families were indicted, including the boss, Arnold Squitieri, Anthony Magali, Gregory DePalma. All sorts of people were hemmed up in this indictment. You would ultimately testify in that case. Do you remember walking into court that day, and did Greg mouth anything to you? What was the thought from him?
Yeah, that was an interesting day, Jeff. I mean, you know, first of all, I had to go into the back way. I had the SWAT team take me in there. I says, guys, are we
Right.
overkilling over here? You know, but they had that come in, and you know, these guys did a great job, the SWAT guys. And but anyway, what happened is you know, of course, I can't listen to the testimony because I'm a witness, so I couldn't sit in the gallery and talk to and listen to the conversation. But when it was my turn, I walked up and I almost like laughed because I saw Greg in a wheelchair with a big oxygen tank. He was unshaven. He looked like he was drooling. He had a little Milky Way bar in front of him, right? And he had a blanket that he was cold. And all he did, it reminded me, because Greg told me, and it's recorded, and it actually was played in the trial. The last thing the prosecution played was this tape where Greg goes, and there I was, laying in the gurney, like almost dead, drooling, didn't shave, wearing a mask with the oxygen, had these people, and I'm sitting there, lying there rather, and they come in and they actually, I think he had the the way he explained it to me, the judge came in and sentenced him at the hospital because they thought he was a goner. That so they said they only gave him 70 months. So he said suddenly he opened his eyes like he goes, "Oh my God, I didn't get like 20 years out of this or 15 years for the scores case."
You're talking about the previous
Yes, the
case.
previous one. So that segment of that Greg told me all of that. We played it in the trial. So after we played it, I walk off, and as I walking by Greg, I look at Greg, and I was going to say, "Hey, Greg, how you doing?" Instead, he looked at me and goes, "You cocksucker." And the judge said, hit the hammer. They cannot do that. And I said, "Don't worry about it." And I just walked out the door. But I had to laugh. It was comical watching him because I knew he was probably acting. And I think Greg lasted how many years after that?
Greg died in 2009.
2009. So he was in prison 2006. 3 years. The trial was 2006. About 3 more years. And like I said, Jerry Capizzi asked me a long time ago what I thought. I says, "Good riddance," but this guy was one of a kind. I mean, if you didn't know him, very likable guy, a charmer, and I could see how successful the Westchester Premier Theater was because he was a front man. He was like a ringmaster. He walked around and shook hands and kissed babies and was a likable guy. But I saw both that and I saw his dark side, where half the time he wanted to smack somebody, beat somebody, rob somebody, and this guy this and this guy that, and But that was Greg DePalma to me. I mean, it was a tough job out of all my assignments, in as much as that, he was just so taxing. I mean, every day was the same ritual of getting money. It was all about the Benjamins with him, and like all the mobsters are in that life, it's all about not making headlines, it's making money, and that's what Greg lived by. He believed in.
You saying all this, it makes me think about, you mentioned Greg's wife, right? Fought a lot. And I think it really, in the end, the people that really suffer are people like his wife. You look at, if she is still alive, Greg's been dead, 15 years. Her son died, several years ago. What did she really have in the end? Like all that life she had, and what was it all for? As she said, her husband introduced her son to this, and he essentially died because of it as well. Those are the people in the end I think you gotta really feel bad for, right?
Yeah, he also had another son.
Yeah, I think he moved.
He moved. He wanted, I think, get away from it. I don't know what his wife, I think it was Terry was her name. I just think she's been through hell and back with this man, and I hope she's doing well. And but I mean, just living with him could have been. And when you go to Greg's house, it was like a museum. He had all kinds of artwork, just stuff all over, ready to sell and turn over, and having to live like that, like a kind of a hoarder, a hoarder with so much money.
Yeah.
Because all of that stuff was priceless. I mean, him and Willie Mays, he had every Willie Mays memorabilia because him and Willie were tight, and Leroy Neiman artwork, which is very expensive. He had so many of those. So I hope his wife, I don't know whether we seized it or not, but if not, she sold him and is making a better life for herself than if she's still alive.
I always say Greg DePalma is one of the most interesting mobsters of the last 25 years. I mean, just you go from being close with Liz Taylor and Dinah Ross and Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin and Willie Mays to everything that happened with you. He's just a fascinating guy. If you want to learn more about Jack Garcia, one of the best books, in my opinion, ever written on the mob is Making Jack Falcone. I included the link in the description of the video. It's a New York Times bestseller, and you can learn a whole lot about the trial and everything that went on. Jack, let's answer some questions. We got over 400 people in here live. People are enjoying hearing you speak. We'll just kind of go down here. And I'm going to start out. Someone's asking you about, all the informants that are on YouTube today, right? We have, even Joey Merlino, who's not an informant, but someone who, is connected to Philadelphia at one point. He's now on YouTube. We've heard John Jr. at some point is going to come out with a podcast. When you think about, you're around people like Greg, people like that. Did you ever think that would happen?
No, let me tell you something. It's probably Greg rolling in his grave, as well as some of the historical mobsters, Lucky Luciano, all these guys.
Yeah.
It would be in awe of this because, you know, the mob as we knew it, as we were growing up, I guess, and the way it's portrayed on television, these people probably would not be alive today. I mean, let's just face it. But all of this started with Henry Hill.
Yeah.
Henry Hill was kind of the guy who went out there and he was
Made it
doing
public. Yeah.
He was doing dinner shows and everything.
Howard Stern.
Yeah, Howard Stern, you name it. He was out there and he was just a low-level associate. But now you have some serious people. I mean, you have guys like Sammy the Bull, Mikey DiLeonardo, who I think probably out of all these guys is probably the most honest guy out there doing this and speaking from the heart and like it is. I mean, in my opinion, he's sought and found redemption, and God bless him. And then you have other guys that are involved, and you wonder, like Sammy the Bull, how many, making all this money. I mean, how many chances this guy's get? Why aren't we getting that glory? I mean, think about that. This guy's responsible for 19 murders, okay? And people are just feeding into him, and people like who live a decent life and work, what do they have? This guy, I hear rumors he's making about $250,000. So,
Yeah, no, listen, I know for a fact he does very well. He's created a life, and I think when you look at it and you say to yourself, what does that tell? And I interviewed John Gleason, the guy who made the deal with Sammy, and I asked him, what does that say to why are you making deals with these sort of people? Why are you allowing this? I will say though, Jack, and I've said this publicly, I interviewed Sammy, I spoke to him for 2 hours. He's one of the nicest people I've ever encountered doing this, but that's the thing about those guys. They are nice, but they're like Greg. All they're worried about is how can I get in this guy's pocket or how can I manipulate this guy? And they kill you with kindness, and before you know it, they're stealing everything you have. And Sammy is a guy that's all about that. But you're right; it's fascinating, and you have to wonder what would the John Gottis and the Luckies and the Frank Costellos think all this, because it's pretty unbelievable.
Yeah, especially like Gotti. I mean, here's a guy who lived and breathed Cosa Nostra and has the guy that he picked, his underboss, doing this, and cooperating.
Yeah,
I mean, these are things that John Gotti probably, like I said, you can't. But, a lot of times you hear they're friendly and talking all that, but let's not forget the dark side. You know what I mean? These are killers. Some of these guys are stone cold killers.
And Sammy's a guy who at this point has said so many wild things at this point that it's kind of hard to kind of justify. I think it's, kind of run out of some things to talk about.
Yeah, I could see that. And think about it too. He had this opportunity. He gets out in Arizona. He goes back to dealing dope. And he built a successful ecstasy ring in Arizona. And like I said, if it wasn't for fate, the fact that Fat Sal Mangiavellano and Hook Carbonaro, he was marked for death.
Yes.
And what happens, he gets arrested, luckily, and he survived that hit from Peter Gotti, and now he's making all this money, and what happens when that stops? Is Sammy going back to what he does best?
You got to wonder. I mean, recently there was an individual on YouTube, a guy called Lee Cole, who went out and approached him. And this guy, Lee Cole, was attacked by Gerard Gravano, Sammy's son. And this guy, Lee Cole, claims that Sammy had that look in his eye where, like, he could still do what he has to do to hurt you. So,
well, you can't change the spot of a leopard, but there are times that it all depends. I mean, he was known for violence, and that's all he knows, and
yes.
Other people are different, I think. but I do believe in redemption. I've always did, and I give people the benefit of the doubt, and hopefully maybe Sammy's in the right path, and as well as some of these other guys, and I wish them all the best luck, and there is, because if not, the FBI is around the corner, you know.
Yes, they are. Pete Rock says, Jack, did you ever come in contact with Dominic Sicali? Dominic is on YouTube as well now.
Yes.
Banano guy. Did you ever come in contact with
No,
him?
no, I did not. But like I said, I saw him on YouTube. He's got a pretty good show too. Listen, these guys have content. You have to give them. They were out there in the life that we only read about or see in the movies. I mean, these guys lived it. You know, like I lived it. I saw some of the things, but these guys were even to a different degree level, and they do have great stories to tell, and the audience wants to hear it. You know?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is a very popular genre, as we know. This is a great question. How were you able to keep your personal life separate from Undercover? Because, I mean, Jack, I'll be honest, I get anxiety over like very little things in my life. I couldn't imagine, running a case in Atlantic City with Asian organized crime, running a case with the mob, and then going home and having dinner with your wife. Like, how does that work?
Yeah, well, you didn't go home. I mean, I did 26 years in the Bureau. 24 was dedicated to just working undercover. And I did over 100 undercover operations, and God knows how many countless buy-bust of dope cases that we did up in New York and in Philadelphia. Now, grant you, coming home, sometimes you work these cases, you don't come home. I wasn't home for months. The reason being, you're just so absorbed. A guy like Craig DePalma, you can't go home. He owns you 24/7. Yeah. I mean, it's mostly that way. He would call you, and I didn't want to say, I mean, we all know what the mobs, one thing about mobsters, if you're on a surveillance and you watch this guy and he knows you're behind him, either he's going to the clubhouse or he's going to see his kumara, he's going to go to see his mom. So if you miss him, you can catch him all around. Well, the same thing, with Greg and all, with me. I can't say I'm going to see you and I'm out of state, and how am I going to get back to see you? So I had to be, again, the word is accountability. You have to be accountable, and that's why I never kind of went home. And so it does affect keeping your personal life, and it does, especially when I was juggling cases. When I had a break, I, of course, had to do these other cases, and it was very stressful, and I not to sound like a weak guy or anything, but usually people deal with stress in a different way. I dealt with stress eating Entenmann's, you know what I mean? I love food, so I would eat, and that's how I gained the weight. So it was more like, that was it, but I'm grateful I'd rather be food than alcohol or drugs, or become one of them, And
it's also, you're probably essentially saying that it's also important to have a wife who, is understanding, right?
Very supportive. Yeah, you need someone who knows about the life, who not about the life, who knows your life as an agent, and this is your job, and it's the job you're doing, and technically it's the job that makes you happy, because I enjoyed it. I mean, when I retired, there was a void in my heart. I mean, I missed the adrenaline rush, with what you feel when you're doing undercover. The fact that you're posing as you're an actor basically, but you're also a salesman. You're selling yourself to them, and Absolutely. There's nothing better than knowing that you got somebody, and that feeling. It's great. It's like getting the Oscar.
Yeah, I would imagine it's quite exhilarating. Greg DePalma was made in the Mafia in 1977, and the first capo regime he had was Nino Gaggi. This is a great question. NYC Crime, so I shout out to him. Says, Jack, did Greg tell you any Nino Gaggi stories?
Come to think of it, no. He never talked about Nino Gaggi. Only he talked about the male being a total crazy man, yeah. And that's the part that I never got from Greg, although he alluded to it, was that Greg was involved. He was in Nino Gaggi's crew, which was Roy DeMail's crew. Now, I haven't found any way of proving that Greg was involved in any kind of hit. Now, a guy being in that crew would probably be involved in something or assisting dig a grave, be the crash car, be whatever, the getaway car. So, but as far as, that the only time when he got angry, he said, I did so much for this family. And I just read between the lines that. But as far as Nino guy, he never mentioned a word, neither with Dominic Montiglio. He loved guys like Rudy Santabello, which I met several times. He was a capo with the Genovese. He also loved this guy, Scop Di Pasquale. Loved him. They were always together. And a lot of these old timers. And I'm sure there was a lot of old timers that hated Greg. But to be honest with you, he had a group of guys that it was like the old guys. He liked the old guys. New guys, he wasn't too keen, especially like Vaccaro. He liked Vaccaro being in our crew, but at times he would wonder. I would look at his eyes and say, is Vaccaro here to whack me and take over the crew? Or what is his role here? I know he's connected with Arnold and all that, but he would always be territorial. He fed you what you needed to know. And, but he was strictly Cosa Nostra. That fight incident that occurred at Bloomingdale's, he specifically told Vaccaro that you got to go on record with this. You can't put your hands on a made guy, but don't worry about it. This guy goes on record. He's got to go through me. I'll make sure I'll squash it. But he doesn't necessarily have to go through him. He could have gone directly to the consigliere or somebody else.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I've never heard any involvement of Nino or sorry, Greg in murdering anybody. I do know Nino got you at one point when he was indicted because of Greg mentioned at one point he should kill this motherfucker for getting him involved and opening his mouth. Jack, did Greg ever mention any stories about Frank Sinatra? He was pretty close with him.
Oh, all the time. Frank and Dean. Yeah, Frank Sinatra, he liked him a lot. 1 second. Yeah, he liked Frank Sinatra, and Dean Martin, I think he liked him a lot. But he talked about, how one time they hustled him in that night what was that? Nights of not.
You're saying they hustled Frank Sinatra into performing for free.
For free at a show, but the Malta, it was the Knights of Malta. And it's a secret organization that's been around for centuries. And Jimmy the Weasel and Greg assumed that this guy was going to fall for it because he loved awards. He didn't prefer, he didn't care about women or good times or money because he had all of that. So they set up this thing where they were going to put him in the Knights of Malta, which was a big honor. They invited Frank Sinatra's mother to come, and they got all dressed up. They got some guy supposedly from Yugoslavia. I don't know how they got this guy with a cape and everything else, and went to this whole ritual and inducted Frank Sinatra into the Knights of Malta. And he even got himself the cross, which was a very big honor with them. So Frank was ecstatic about it, delighted about being in the Knights of Malta. But as time went on, Fradiano and Greg shook him down by saying, hey, the Knights of Malta is experiencing some financial difficulties. They're really hurting. What do you think about putting on a show? He says, I'll put on 2 shows for you, free of charge. You ain't got to pay me. And that money from that performance and all that side hustle that they did went into the coffers of the Gambino crime family.
Of course it did. They were masters at scamming people, and I'm sure they made tons of money. Curtis Carwell says, I like this guy, Jack. I've watched him at every interview of him I can find. Thank you for all your service, Jack. Thank you, Curtis.
I appreciate that. Very kind words.
Yeah, people really like when you come on. They like your interviews. One other question. Victor V says, Jack, did Greg carry a gun regularly?
No. One of the things I thought, too, because, again, I worked dope, that these guys will walk around gunned. That's the way they depict them all the time in the movies. You only take a piece with you when you're going to do a hit. In New York, There's some strict gun rules, and they know these guys are being followed. And they know that the FBI, the NYPD, organized crime unit pulls them over every once in a while just to hassle them or maybe tickle the wire or whatever they may want to do. So carrying a gun is lethal for them because they could wind up, like I said, in jail for a long time over a stupid thing for no reason. That's why I think one of the rules also involved in if you have a sit down, you can't bring a gun to the sit down.
Yep.
So the guns are only brought out whenever you're going for a hit. I never saw Greg flash one, nor did I carry one. At the beginning I did because I didn't know what to expect, but then realized that, I'd rather have my mouth get me out of a situation than a bullet.
Yeah, that sounds like a pragmatist way of thinking about it. One other thing I wanted to point out: SD says these stories from guys that are on the job undercover are a lot more fascinating than the coming from the guys on the other side. I agree, Jack. You have so many fascinating stories. Maybe you'll be on YouTube soon. You never know.
Hey, I'd
Uh,
love to. But hey, thank you very much, SD. I appreciate it.
yep.
It's really funny watching the bad guys and the good guys go at it. I mean, we respect each other. You know, they know that our job is to get them, and their job is to avoid getting gotten by us. So it's a cat and mouse game that we play. And but although I have to say about the mob, I've always said this is like I know that Hollywood glorifies them and they build them up to be what they are. And having worked the drug side, which of course, in my opinion, are more ruthless, treacherous, they make so much money compared to the mobsters do, and are very smart. Like I said before, you lose a mobster in a surveillance, excuse me, you could catch up with him somewhere along the lines. But these guys from Colombia or Mexico, South America, if you catch them, they're gone in the wind. The next
Hmm.
day, they're gone. The cartels will move them to LA. So they're a little more difficult to work regarding what the mob guys are. And the fact that the violence that they do is, I think, what fears them and why a lot of times people are afraid to turn and become informants, which was the way it used to be with the mob. Nowadays, I guess the philosophy is leaving bodies on the street is bad for business. And that's true. It is bad for
Absolutely.
business because nowadays there are cameras everywhere. So, it's that. But at the same time, there's a lot of guys who do that. Is that
Mikey,
is that Mikey Scars? Hello, Michael. How you doing?
yeah, he says he just got up from a nap. You're late, Michael. We're about to end this thing. But hey, you got to get your beauty sleep. Jack, before we go, I want to say one other thing. You made a comment when Garcia passed, or not Garcia,
I
when
haven't
Greg
passed yet.
passed. Yeah, you haven't passed yet. You said, I hope Greg made peace with God before he died, but if he didn't, God better watch his wallet. Um,
Yes, that's very true.
you're
You know,
probably
I'm
not wrong
telling.
because he stole from everybody.
Listen, he's hustling up there. Everybody, that's all new territory, and I don't think he's up there personally. I think he's downstairs. For all
Yeah,
the
I don't
deeds
think
that
he's
he's
there either.
done. And but yeah, you got to watch his wallet if he went up to see God.
Absolutely. Great. Jack, good to see you. It's always good to catch up with you. I always enjoy talking to you. People really like when you come on, and you don't do that many interviews, so it's nice to see you occasionally. And I'm sure down the road, I get a feeling we're going to see more of you because you have so many stories from not just the mob stuff, but you went undercover against cartels and Asian organized crime and all sorts of different people. So it'd be exciting to hear some of those stories. But I really appreciate you coming on. You're the first person I've ever had on here twice. So we interviewed you like 2 years ago. But
Well,
I
Jeff,
always like
it
catching up with you.
really is a pleasure. You are definitely one of the top guys in this game. Your research is fascinating and amazing, and you really know your stuff, and you're good at what you do. And wish you the very best of luck with that. And I always picture you as one of the top guys. Mikey Scars is one of the top guys in the among the mobsters, and keep up the great work you're doing.
It's really nice to hear that coming from you, Jack. My door's always open to you. I think you're a fascinating guy. And I'm glad to see you're doing well health wise. You look great. Keep at it. Weight loss is always it's an everyday journey. You got to keep at it because people like us, if we're not too careful, we'll be right back where we were. So,
True.
so yeah, thank you for the kind words. Thank you for a great interview. We'll talk to you soon.
Likewise. Take care, Jeff.
Thanks, buddy. Jack Garcia on the show, one of my favorite guests. I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. We'll see you next week here on the Sit Down.